I'm traveling from Washington, D.C. to Boston to visit my parents, whom I haven't seen in over 16 months due to COVID. My dad, who turns 94 in 6 months, has been talking for years about writing his memoirs, but never got around to it. I decided to bring my camera on this trip to record the story of his life, not just for me and my siblings, but for his grandchildren, and especially his great-grandchildren, whom are too young to understand all that he went through. This is for my father. This is his story.
So I wanted to switch gears and talk about high school.
Okay.
Can you tell me about growing up, going to high school, what that was like? Do you remember what year you were in high school?
Oh, sure. I graduated in 1946, so I was in from 42 to 46, right? Okay. So I came out of boarding school and went into high school. And high school for me, I guess for everyone, was the world kind of opened up. You know, right before high school, America was attacked by the Japanese, Pearl Harbor.
Right.
On December 7th, 1941. And I remember in boarding school listening to the president give this famous speech.
Yesterday,
we are now in this war,
December
every man,
7th,
woman, and child, and so
1941.
And so that was kind of a turning
date which will live
for
in
me.
infamy.
And it's very interesting because during that period of time, the president said, we're in this war, every man, woman, and child, and he brought the country together. This was Franklin Roosevelt saying that we have to all pitch in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being a little kid, I said, okay, I have to do my part, and so I did everything the president said we should do. I collected scrap metal, aluminum, copper, and that sort of thing, turned them in. And then we would darken our blinds at night, put the curtains, because you talked about air raids and
right.
so on and so on. We had victory gardens, so I did all of this. I also saw movies. There were movies. Hollywood made a lot of war movies at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, being a little kid, you're turned on by that sort of thing. Bombers being attacked by German aircraft and, and gunners firing, out of out of firing back, at them and so on. So I said to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to become an aerial bomber. A gunner on one of these big flying fortresses or whatever.
Interception strong and determined.
And so that was high school. Still feeling that way. But in the meantime, high school, you have to deal with high school. And I've come of age and, meeting people, new friends, and et cetera, et cetera. So the world kind of opened up, and I realized I was no longer a kid, no longer, protected, so to speak. I was still a member of the church and felt very, it was kind of a cozy feeling. I had my parents, still protected, but aware now, more aware of what was going on. Segregation became more and more in my mind because I'm more aware. I'm older now. For example, we would we had a couple of movie theaters and my area where we lived, but colored people were allowed to go to a white theater in the white section of town, but we had to sit in the balcony, and the whites sat in the orchestra. And we'd get on the bus and we'd go and we'd walk to the white section of town after the movie. We'd go and then come back, and that was something. But I became aware of all of this thing. And as I thought about it over the years, there were many times we'd go into the white sections of town, even though Mobile, again, was extremely segregated. For example, again, my Catholicism, there were periods of time during the year, high holy days. For example, we would say the Stations of the Cross, and they would have the Stations of the Cross in the chapel, in the churches. But it was customary for us to say one or two Stations of the Cross in our church, and then we'd get on our bikes and we'd ride into the white sections of Mobile and say a few stations, ride to another church, and so on and so on and so on. And that was perfectly acceptable. No one ever batted an eye or said anything to us. And then, we'd come back and we would finish at our church. That was this ritual we would go through. As a matter of fact, I received my high school diploma in a white church at the cathedral, the bishop, there. And again, you think about this in retrospect, highly segregated place. I never go to mass there, but I graduated there. My class graduated there. Classes before me and classes after me graduated. So Mobile was a very, very funny city. High school was, again, the ups and downs. There were mostly good times in high school. Growing up, playing football, playing in the high school band, singing in operettas, and in the choir and the glee club, and so it was. There were good times.
Do you remember a favorite subject or classes that you particularly liked?
I never thought of that. I think one. If I really stop and think about it now, I think that geometry was one. I had a very good geometry teacher. Not that I don't consider myself good at it, but it was good. And another, now that I'm thinking about it, civics. I don't think they teach civics in high school anymore. Do you know what civics is? You're learning about government, how governments are run, and so on. And civics was very, very good for me. And I enjoyed learning how to type. That was one of the things that the nuns taught us to do, how to type, which was really, really good. And because it was my first step, for learning a living, how to earn, a living. And music, of course, has always played a big part in my life in high school, even before high school, and afterwards, even now. Music is a big part of me, my life.
Do you remember any particular teachers that stood out?
I do, yeah. One, and I'm trying to think what she taught other than civics and music, and I just don't remember. It's just too far back now. But yeah, because of her patience and just her ability to relate to young kids, and I just thought she was wonderful. And when I think back to my high school years, I always, I think of others but I particularly think of her because, again, she was my music teacher. She was, I think, civics. Did you learn civics in high school or grade school? I'm not sure. It's too far back. But
Were these teachers white?
they were all white. They were nuns who came from a convent in Illinois. They were Dominicans, and the mother house was in Illinois. So they came south to teach these poor colored kids.
Okay.
The priest of our parish, they were white, so the school was run by a white priest and school and nuns.
And were you still thinking about joining the priesthood? I know that over the years you've talked about that as something that when you were a kid you had wanted to
I
do.
wanted to do that when I was in boarding school. I was, I don't know what got me onto that, but I wanted to go into the seminary and was very, very, very much set on it. And then at some point that, I met this little girl and she invited me to meet her. I'm not sure if it was this girl or another girl, but one of the girls invited me. I went to lunch that day. We all sat in the dining room eating, and I found a note under my plate. Can you meet me behind the barn tonight after such and such time? And I did. And that was my first kiss. I didn't initiate it. This girl did. And after that, I said, whoops, no more priesthood. I mean, it wiped out all interest.
So that was in boarding school?
That was in boarding school.
Okay.
That was before I reached high school. So by the time I reached high school, that was not, no chance of that.
Do you have recollections of particular friends, whether male or female, in high school?
Oh yeah, I had loads of friends in high school. Many friends. Yeah. And in boarding school, as a matter of fact, one particular friend in boarding school, female, she also went to high school with me.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we remained friends, the whole time I was in high school, till I left Mobile, and of course lost touch with her and most of my friends.
And your parents, the routine at home, was it still relatively the same?
It was pretty much the same, and it never changed.
Your dad was still working?
No, they
your
were
mom was
still
working.
They were still working, and I, just went to school on my own, and just pretty much was on my own during the day. Of course, I was at school, and then I came home, and I don't remember if they were probably not home when I got home. I'm not sure. I think not. And I think no, they were not home, because I remember coming home many occasions when Mr. Johnson, our next door neighbor that I told you about, I'd say, okay, I'm done with school today, I'm going to relax. And he'd say to me, Howard, come on out. We have to cut wood, saw wood. And we had this two-handle saw,
Wow.
And so I'd have to, I've got to work. Of course, you couldn't say no to,
Right.
To adults. That was a no-no. So, I would work. But that wasn't all the time,
Right.
I had time to do things I needed to do and so on. But high school was very, very busy because I played football and I did all the things. After school, there was band practice. If not band practice, choir practice. If not choir practice, glee club practice and something. Or something going on, preparing for something in the church. So there was always something going on, and so I was kept busy 24/7, when I was in high school.
What instrument did you play?
I played the drums. I started out, my mother bought me a saxophone, a pretty brand new saxophone. And I started playing and I decided just not what I wanted. You know, kids, I want to play this, you know. And it wasn't, so I don't remember what she did with it. But I would go to band practice because I wanted to be with my girlfriend who played saxophone in the band. So I would sit with the band in the room where they were practicing. And I don't know how it happened. Maybe the bass drum player was out that particular day, or they needed a second one. I don't know. They needed a cymbal player. I didn't play the drums, and I think the band master asked me if I would play the cymbals that day at practice. And I said, sure, because again, I'm there anyway,
Right.
waiting for my girl. I could walk her home. So I played the cymbals, and I was good at it. And so he asked me, would you join the band? I said, yes. So I played the cymbals in the band. And then later on, for some reason, I moved to bass drum. That's where I stayed
Okay.
during the time I was in high school.
Okay.
Yep.
So you graduated from high school. What was next for you?
Well, before I graduated high school, again, the war was on. And I mentioned seeing these war movies, which really impressed me. And I wanted to join the Army Air Force. That was my dream, to join the Air Force and become an aerial gunner, because that's what I had seen in the movies.
Right.
So I kind of faked my age and went to the, what do you call it? The recruiting office, and said I wanted to join. Again, we're in Mobile, we're in Alabama, and this is the Army Air Force, the Army Air Corps. They weren't separated at the time. And the recruiter told me that we don't take colored people.
At all.
At all. He didn't say anything about, he just said we don't take colored people. No. So that was that. So I went to the Navy because my neighbor and best friend had gone into the Navy, and he was a seaman. He was older than me, so he was a seaman, which was a little unusual in retrospect. When I went there, I said I want to join the Navy. He said, we'll take you, but on one condition. The only thing that you'll do is become a messman. You know, you serve, work in the what do you call it?
Like the dining hall.
Yeah, but they call it in the mess hall or whatever it is.
Mess
Yeah.
hall.
And I said, no thanks. I didn't go to the Coast Guard because I knew my neighbors had joined the Coast Guard, twins, and both of them were messmen. That's what they did, serving the mess hall. And so I wasn't about that. So I went to the Army, went to the Navy, knew about the Coast Guard, and so I just stayed in high school until I finished. By that time I was 18, I had to register. So at 18, I went back to the Army, and I, registered for service. I had to do that. And I said I want to go into the Army, and didn't wait for them to call me, because again, I want to serve.
Right.
This time, the recruiter that I talked with, he said, do you have any skills? First time anyone had said to me, what can you do? And I said, well, I'm a high school graduate and I can type. He said, how many words can you type? I said, at least 65 words a minute. He said, we'll have to test you. Yes, tested me. I did more than 65 words a minute. And you know how kids are. Kids are, you did that fine. Went into the Army, and so at the time you could volunteer for a minimum of 18 months.
Okay.
And that's what I did. I wanted to see what it's like. I didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. You know, whether I want to go to college or I want to become, you know, a brick mason, or I had no idea. So I went into the Army and said, okay, this will give me time to kind of figure out what the next step will be. While I was in the Army, they sent me to clerk typist school, but it was more than clerk typist school because I knew how to type. I didn't need to learn how to type, but they taught me how to, well, how can I, basic management skills, I think I should put it that way. I learned some basic administrative skills, I should put it, not management, how the Army operated, because you know, you fill out this form this way,
Right.
and how information comes in, how it goes out. This is what you're responsible for if you go into this unit. So when I was finished with clerk typist school, orders came down that I was to be sent to Alaska. So I was issued cold weather gear, and everything was really practically on my way to Alaska when a first sergeant of a particular company came in and said, Luckett, your orders have changed. You're going to be assigned to such and such company, blah, blah, blah. I said, yes, sir, what can I say?
Right.
It turned out that he was the first sergeant
Of that company.
So I worked for him. I don't know how he did, when I went to classification, they told me, look, you're going to Alaska, but he came in and said, no, he's coming into my company. Again, it's a segregated, at the time, segregated outfit. And so that's where I served, with not the whole time, but for a big portion of my time. And
where were you?
at this time, I was at, I went to Fort Benning, and then for intake, and then I went to Camp Lee, Virginia, for basic training. And then after basic training, I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. So this was Fort Dix.
Okay.
And I was assigned to a quartermaster corps. And the quartermaster corps is what it says. It's one big unit with all types of specialists. In my unit, my company, we had not only clerk typists like myself, but you had truck drivers, you had mechanics, you had armorers, you had MPs, you had everything. So after roll call in the morning, everybody would go out to his particular duty station, which could be all over the base, not just in where we were just in a section of the base. So after a period of time, one day my first sergeant came in and said to me, Luckett, you're being transferred to, what is it? Not payroll, to finance department. So I left the company where I was a company clerk, and I'd go to business every morning, I'd call it, into another section of the camp where all of my co-workers now are white instead of being surrounded by, black first sergeant,
right,
this, that, and the other people in the office with me. I'm now working with black co-workers. My immediate supervisor is a second lieutenant. He's white. first sergeant is white. His assistant, the woman, she was white. And so I was the only black soldier working there in that little unit, although there were black civilian women working someplace in finance, and I could never figure out how they connected. But they were there because I saw one of them, and I liked her, and we look at each other and say hello to each other in the morning, and she'd go into her section, I'd go into mine. That was the only time I'd see her. But it was very, very interesting. The military was still segregated, and we've talked about people, good people, bad people. I couldn't have asked for a better workstation because my first sergeant, first of all, first sergeants don't associate with their subordinates.
Right.
So at dinner time, this is what would happen. You're away from your barracks. So where are you going to eat? Black soldiers couldn't eat at the white mess halls. So it meant you would have to go back, hitch a ride some way back to
your barracks.
To your barracks. You have chow, lunch meal, and then you
come back.
Go back to your duty station. And then at an evening when you're done, you hitch a ride back. My boss would often say to me, Howard, why don't you have lunch with me and his assistant, I think it was his girlfriend, very, very nice. Why don't you have lunch with me and Miss such and such? And so we'd go to Heightstown. They'd take me to Heightstown for lunch, and they did this on numerous occasions so that I wouldn't have to go back to the barracks. I guess they would see me trying, how the hell am I going to hitch a ride all the way on the other side of a camp to do this and so on and so on, which I thought was very, very interesting and, thoughtful of them, to do this, So anyway, at some point, that 18 months went by very, very fast. And so I was discharged. But when I was in finance, what I did was I prepared a discharge for soldiers coming back from the European Theater of Operation, ETO, we called it. And I would compute the amount of pay that they were owed they'd come back to New Jersey. This is their port of, debarkation, from Fort Dix to wherever I live in Indiana or South Carolina. So I would compute the pay, make out the discharge. My bosses would sign them, give it to them, they're off. So that's what I did, and that's that photograph in your room there. Right there, me at my typewriter doing that. That was in that office. And, where I was. And so I was discharged and came back to Mobile.
Now the war's still going on?
The war has gone, the war is ending now. I graduated in 1946 now. So the war technically is still in effect because the war didn't really end. How can I articulate this? The cutoff date for World War II veterans was December 1947. No, December 1946. No, that's not true. I came in. I went in. Yeah, the cutoff date is December 1946. If you were in the military
at that time,
December 1946, you were a World War II veteran. I was in the military at that time. I didn't come out of the military, that is the Army, until December 1947.
I see.
So I was processing discharge of people were still coming back from the European
But you were considered a World War
I
II.
am a World War II veteran and a Korean War veteran. Again, because of a cutoff point.
Mm-hmm.
So when my medals that I got were a World War II victory medal, because I was in during that time, and a, what was the other one? World War II victory medal, and there was another connected with World War II. I'll have to think of it. National Defense Service Medal.
Okay.
That were the two that were issued me then, as well as my Army Good Conduct Medal and so on. So after that, I came back to Mobile and spent a period of time there until I, just realized that there was just nothing, no reason for me to stay in Mobile any longer. I had to get out of there because all my friends, because they graduated, they were all gone to school or married and moved away and so on. So I was pretty lonely there at that point after I came back from Mobile. And so I wrote Ida, or I wrote her, I don't remember which. And I said, can I come, stay with you? Because there's nothing here for me. And she said, yes. So I went to New York and I stayed with Ida. And then she suggested, while you're trying to figure out what you want to do, why don't you take some courses at Columbia? I took courses there and I liked it. It's a wonderful place. And see what you like. And I did. And it was really the best decision I ever made. It was great. And I remember taking, didn't know, I just say anything, so I just took an anthropology course. And I liked it. I took another anthropology course and I liked that. And then by that time, I think I decided, well, maybe I should apply. And at the time, Columbia had, in addition to all of its other schools, Columbia College, Barnard, School of Journalism, Teachers College, College of Pharmacy Medicine, School of General Studies, a school for adults and for returning veterans like myself, and for anyone else who wanted to apply. That's how I met Hedwin, who was a young 18-year-old. I think I was a few years older than she was. And there were a lot of people like her, and there were a lot of people my age and older. Anyway, while I was taking those courses, I decided, well, I like it here, and I really did. So I applied for a job on the campus, and I was hired to work in the library as a page. So I worked in college library. And since you don't know the Columbia setup, there's no point in mentioning buildings and so on. But I really liked college library because, number one, I like handling books, and I still do, and it goes back to my days in college library. People would come in, return the books, and then it was my job to put the books on a cart and then take
back
them
to the shelves.
into the stacks in the shelves and then file them. And that's how I became familiar with the duodecimal system. So fast forward a few years later when I go into the Marine Corps, and they assigned me, my assignment is administration. And when I go to my duty station, they assign me to the office. And their filing system is based on the duodecimal system. So I was, quite at home and just soared, doing that work there. So anyway, at some point I applied for admission to Columbia. They they had me take an entrance exam, and they got my transcripts, which weren't that great, and Columbia didn't like them at all because I wasn't really a good student
Right.
in high school, but I did what I needed to do to get through, but I wasn't a good student. So they said, you're going to have to take an entrance exam, and I did. And I think maybe they had other people, I think everyone who went through GS had to take the entrance exam. But even though my experience at Columbia was all positive, that first getting in there was not positive, because the guy and the guys, the people that I dealt with, were really were not helpful and didn't want people like me there. There were few black people on Columbia's campus, undergraduate and graduate. And I remember him saying, when he asked me, what do you want to major in? I had no idea what I wanted to major in. And I think I must have said something, why do you want to major in that? I must have said psychology or something, I don't know. And so he questioned me, and I felt that this wasn't really necessary.
He was just being racist.
He was just, he was just pushing for something. And then he said something, oh, you'll have to take, and then, okay, so I passed the entrance exam, and this is all confusing, it's been so long ago. But I remember going back, say, okay, I'm going to register for courses now. And so I went back, and I think this person or another person saw what I had. This is in my semester, when I'm going this, so many courses, so many points, credits. He said, oh, you have to take remedial English. And I said, no, I passed the English section on my test. Go look at it, And it really pissed me off, and I contained myself, because you're in no position. I felt vulnerable. I'm trying to get into the school, and
but this is a school official who is.
Yeah. This is a guy who's interviewing me. Someone I don't know, in the bursar's office or what. Anyway, but I did. It finally, I got in the mail my card where I could, I'm fine. I'm official. A student at Columbia University. I have access to everything on every campus. And in GS at the time, we could, and I think perhaps other students could do it, but I think we had more leeway. We could take courses at other colleges on the campus. And I did. I took courses at Barnard. And I may have taken, for some reason, a course at Teachers College.
Okay. That
interested me, because I was trying to find out what do I really want to do. I hadn't figured that out, But mostly once I was in Columbia, it was just like, I go back in the nanosecond and say, do you want to repeat that? I said, yeah, I go back, because I had great instructors, professors were great, made lots of friends.
So most of your classmates white, but
no,
some black.
Yeah, I had maybe a couple of classmates, one or two here and there, that were African American. When I think back right now, I can't quite think of anybody. But I remember a few black people, one at Columbia College. I remember two at Columbia College. One going on becoming a doctor. I think both of them became medical doctors that, strangely enough, Ida worked for.
Oh, really?
He was my best friend. Matter of fact, he invited me to his graduation from Mahari, which is a black medical college. I don't know if it's still around. I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
Anyway, so it was during that time was it? And I have to get straight now. I can't figure out. I think we'll have to take a break, and I got to figure out where, at what point. I hadn't met your mother at that time. At Columbia, when I first started, I did not, because I remember dating classmates from Columbia, so I didn't know her then. I forgot to tell you that when I was discharged from the Army, my boss, second lieutenant, said, Corporal, why don't you join the Army Reserve? And, you can stay fit, and you can go in, you only have to go on duty. What did he say? Once a year, you'd have to go to...
So once a weekend?
No. In the reserve. Once a year, I thought you'd have to. That's my recollection.
Okay.
You'd have to go back on base to do training and do whatever, just to stay fit. So in case you have to be called up again, that's what the reserve is. But I joined the inactive reserve, so I never went back to train or do anything else. But I was subject to call up because I had signed my name. So when the Korean War broke out, I was well into my studies at Columbia, and I asked for a deferment, and the Army did defer me. They did. And the next year, the Army said, you have to, report to active duty. And I said, can I have another deferment? They said, no. And they were emphatic, said, and they were so emphatic, they said something to the point that if you don't report to duty by such and such, we're going to come get you. So I said I didn't want to go back into the Army, not because of any negative experiences, but because I had been in the Army, and my brother Blackie had been in the Marines in World War II in the 40s. So I said, I'd like to join the Marines. And so I said, we don't care where you go.
As long as you serve.
We need you. And so I went to the Corps and asked if I could join the Marine Corps. And the Corps said yes. So they arranged for me to be discharged from the Army Reserve. And then I took the oath of office, and for the Marines.
What year was this?
1951. And so I did. I became a Marine, went to Parris Island, and as you know, I spent time there. I was a squad leader. Did I ever tell you that?
I don't think so.
Okay, if you look at that picture over your bed there, in your room in there, I'm at the front row there with the DIs. And so I did very, very well in Parris Island, got through there. After Parris Island, went to Camp Pendleton where is it?
California?
Yeah, California, but I'm trying to think of the place. Esther, where Naomi lives, I can't think of it. Anyway, anyway, it's
Laguna Beach or
right there, right near Laguna Beach. Anyway, I spent time at Camp Pendleton, and one of the things I remember doing at Camp Pendleton while I was waiting for transfer overseas to my permanent duty station is fighting fires. California has fires all the time, and I'd completely forgotten about that. But I happened to read in the little diary that I kept. I still have it. That we were called out to fight fires, and I remember going out in the evening, early in the evening when it was relatively warm, and then freezing to death. As the night goes on, California can get very, very cold up in the mountains, at night, and freezing to death, near morning after fighting fires all night,
Well, were you trained as a firefighter?
No, not at all. I was sitting. We were sitting there. We were waiting for transfer. So when you're at these holding pen, I'll call it for lack of a better word, you're just there. If somebody needs help to do this or somebody needs help to do that, they just call you. For example, when I came back, let's say back to the States after spending 2 years at my duty station in Hawaii, I was at Treasure Island, and I didn't have anything to do, so they said, "Sergeant, we need you to take a prisoner to San Francisco," So they armed me with the .45, and I had to escort this prisoner to San Francisco for some sort of hearing, I don't know what, and then bring him back. I mean, that's how I spent my day. And then other days, they may have asked me, "Will you stand, guard over here? Will you do this?" Because you're just waiting.
Right.
And in this case, the latter, I was just waiting to go to my final duty station, which was the Brooklyn Naval Yard for a discharge. But yeah, I was waiting in Camp Pendleton to go to Hawaii, and once I got to Hawaii, I was assigned to the administrative offices, and that's how I spent my 2 years doing administrative work, and that was, by the way, again, between the Army and the Corps is where I got my basic management skills that stood me well, throughout my professional life. Right. Because I managed based on how I saw the military management manage. You go through channels, the buck stops here. You give staff what they need to do their task, but then you hold them accountable.
Right.
And the lines of communications are very, very clear. These are my expectations of you as a manager, and I'll give you all of a training, and then I'm not going to micromanage you. Go on out there. But then you got to be accountable. And so that all came from the military. And so for my civilian jobs, all the jobs I had, I used those skills and they never failed me. And I consider myself a good manager because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. What was Hawaii like?
I liked Hawaii. I liked it was a good duty station where I was. I was stationed aboard a naval ammunition depot, and so it was naval. So even though it was naval, it was a small base with a small naval detachment and even smaller Marine detachment. We provided security for the base because the base held ammunition that we fed to the entire Pacific Fleet. So we had trains that would come in and our guys would load, along with civilians who were working on the base, load the trains, and they would be taken to Pearl Harbor and another port, and they would be loaded onto the vessels, and they would go out to sea and so on. And although I did not do that, I was in headquarters. I was a part of it. It was a small unit. And so all of my buddies, or many of my buddies, who were in what we call the guard company, that's what they did. We had administrative, you had medical, you had guard, we had armorers, we had whatever. Well, I was in administration. So the people who would ride shotgun on the trains, when they left the base and they would be traveling, they would be armed guards to make sure that nobody, tried to hijack the trains or do anything, because the war was going on.
Right.
Korean War was going on. Also, we had on that base what we referred to as a radio station. And that's what we called it, the radio station. It was away from us, away from everybody, way out in the boonies. And we stood guard there, and including myself, because at periods of time, they always wanted Marines, whatever you did, whether you worked in a dental clinic or, well, that was naval, but wherever you worked, you had to stay active and your skills had to be, kept up, sharpened. For example, every year when I was in the Corps, I'd have to go to the range to bring up my skills.
Right.
To
Shooting.
To shooting, and then I'd come back, and we loved that because it meant getting away from the base, getting away from the uniform, and you could just hang out, and you'd shoot, and you were back to, nobody's standing over you,
Right.
saying, Sergeant, you're straightening your tie, that sort of thing. Yeah. Anyway, so that was good duty. Hawaii was good in the sense that it was a beautiful place to be. Where else would you want to be? I mean, it's a duty station. I was not enamored of the Hawaiians. The Hawaiians were prejudiced. Many of them that I came in contact with, and that came from the American GIs, the white GIs, and going back to World War II, it happened in Europe. The white GIs tried to prejudice the white Europeans, of French women, German women, against dating Americans. I don't know if you know about that, but there's a lot of, I can give you books to read on that. And Hawaii was the same thing, that blacks were this, blacks were that. And by that time, there were a lot of, and Hawaii was a mixture of not only native Hawaiians, there were relatively few of those, but you had Samoans, Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese, you had a whole community, but the ones that when we would go into town, I remember my buddies and I, we went in one day, I think we'd gotten shots, and when we received shots, they didn't say, okay, go lie down, guys, take a nap. We would train, we would get our rifles, and we would do calisthenics with our rifles. They say, roll the sword and we'll go away, So anyway, we went into town, so we said, let's go get a massage. Okay, let's go. So there were, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 of us went to this massage parlor. I was the only black in the group. And we don't treat colored people, whatever, Negroes, or whatever the term was. And so my colleagues, my buddies, just said, screw you, and we just left. But that was, and then I noticed it. That was the first time I noticed it, and I noticed it in other ways. I know one of my friends, one of my best friends was dating a Japanese girl. And so I asked her, Eileen, can you introduce me to one of your girlfriends? She said, oh, I don't know any girlfriend. I don't have any girlfriend. I don't know anyone, which of course,
Right.
And so that was kind of set, so I never really fell in love with Hawaii. Although whenever we would go out to the hotels, and we would go out to the hotels when we were on leave, we would go to eat, and at, like, let's say the Royal Hawaiian, or, have you ever been to Hawaii, by the way?
Yeah.
No. That was the hotel. That was the Royal Hawaiian. That was located at Diamond Head. That was equivalent to the this Coronado Hotel, that big place there.
Hotel.
Yeah. Coronado, yeah, and the big hotel where everybody went, and we would go there, and because a lot of the American who would come, tourists, would hang out at the Hawaiian Hotel and at the Ala Moana. Those were the only two hotels at the time. And we would look at the American girls, and long to be back home. And these haole girls, meaning American tourists, they would come and we would look at them, and and so on. But no, I wasn't. Although I met a couple of people, civilians, who I became very close with. One taught me how to play the ukulele, and I still have my ukulele that I brought back. That Julian sat on, by the way, and broke when he was. I don't know if you remember that.
Vaguely.
He was visiting us, and we were on the shore, I think, at the time, and he accidentally sat on it, but I got it fixed anyway. It's still here, 60, 70 years ago. And I still periodically hear from a friend who was a baby, and I held her when she was,
Is that the picture in
yeah,
front of the
you
car?
see that, yeah. And her father died a few years ago, but
And of course, now she's a grown woman.
she's a grown woman in her, I guess, 70s now.
Wow.
Yeah, she'd have to be in her 70s. She was just months old when I held her. But anyway, that was it. The Corps was good. I did well in the Corps. When I was in Hawaii, I was in charge of the color guard. I got my ratings were always top. I think they would rate us, I think, every 6 months, and I would always get top ratings. I've forgotten what they 6.0 or whatever. But I always felt when the exec officer asked me to be the color guard, of course I'm saying accepted. I did that to the best of my ability and did well. But I always had feelings about that because I never forgave the military. Well, number one, not letting me serve, when I want to become aerial gunner, whereas other people, white soldiers could do that. Were able to do it. And I'm holding the flag, yet, I'm thinking the flag isn't holding me.
Right.
By that time I'm very much aware, I'm a grown man, aware of that. But
you're a black man.
Yeah, and so but that's the war we live in, and so we deal with it. And so here we are.